This is Ray Mofield again with the Oral History Microphone, and we're pleased today to have as our guest Christy Hall of Calvert City, or at least near Calvert. I never did know just precisely where you live.
I live at Gilbertsville now on Kentucky Lake. I lived at Calvert City for about 22 years, but I'm now on Kentucky Lake.
Oh, that's wonderful. You have a place where you can hunt and fish easily?
Fish. The PVA property is my back line, and so I'm situated there in a very beautiful place, looking out at the lake. The lake is quite a distance from my house. The water actually is quite a distance from my house. It's some 300 yards to the water, but we can see the water from my place and see the water skiing going on, and sometimes it gets a little noisy back there with the picnickers and so forth. But it is a beautiful place, and we enjoy it very much.
Well, that's great. I'm glad to hear it. I've known you for a long time. Were you born in Marshall County?
I was born at Gilbertsville, Kentucky, on October the 9th, 1914, where the Veep Restaurant is now.
Yes, I know that spot.
And that was at that time known as the Bierman Orchard, and that's where I was born. And I lived there in the Gilbertsville, under the post office at Gilbertsville in that area for many years, but then I moved to Calvert City and lived there 22 years. Now I've moved back and have a Gilbertsville address again.
A complete circle.
Right.
Well, now, you know, the genealogists like these tapes because we store one copy in Frankfort and we keep one copy in Marshall County at the library where it can always be checked out like a book. Could you tell us your mother and dad's name?
My dad was Ezra Hall. He was a rural carrier, the first one out of old Gilbertsville, and he traveled to old Birmingham. It was then Route 1. His route has since been divided, and there's 2 routes. But now he started that route, and when he first started, at least half or more maybe of the year he had to use horses.
Say that.
And since I was 8 years old, that was my job, was to take care of those horses. I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning to feed those horses, brush them, put the harness on them, and then I'd come back to the house and Mother'd have breakfast ready.
And you were then ready to eat.
And I was ready to eat, and I'd eat breakfast, and then I'd go back to the barn. And in the wintertime, this was way before daylight.
I wonder if you ever had any of what my dad called lifesavers, thickened gravy, milk gravy.
Oh, you bet. I mean, a country boy couldn't live without that.
No.
And we had that gravy, and there was 10 of us in family, and I was the oldest. And I guess we could have all gotten by without that thick gravy.
Yeah.
Milk gravy, we called it.
Yes. Now, your mother's maiden name.
My mother's maiden name was Bessie Gilmore Smith. And her father's name was Gilbert Smith. And
Did there used to be a Dr. Smith around Calvert?
yes, there was, but she was no kin to that Smith. And my granddad came from around Oak Station in McCracken County in the Blizzard Pond area in there. And I still have some relatives lives in there, but we haven't visited much, and I don't know who they are already. But that's where my granddad Smith came from. Now, my grandmother on my mother's side was an Egner. She was a sister to Pete Egner, who was formerly a sheriff of Marshall County.
I started to say he was sheriff.
So my grandmother was a sister to Pete Egner, and so I'm kin to all the Egners
Yeah.
in Marshall County.
Now there's some more halls around. I wonder, were you kin to the banker? What was his name? Charles?
No, Charles Hall, and his daddy's name was Lewis and Bose, and we knew all of those, and they actually came from the same county where my people came from, up in Webster and Henderson County.
Mm-hmm.
Is where our people migrated from down here, but as far as we know, we were no relation.
What about Ray Hall?
Ray Hall is a cousin.
Mm-hmm.
His dad and my dad were brothers.
Well, I remember him, and well, we'll get off that part, I guess. Let's see. You went to school, your first school, you remember that?
My first school, I went to school in 1920 at Old Gilbertsville, and it was in a two-room school.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the last year for the two-room school. They were building a brand new school building. And by the way, that new school building they built, they made the brick. The citizens in the area made the brick themselves and built that building. And that was built and started into operation in 1921.
Well, that's an interesting angle, too, although I suppose that may not have been as unusual in those days. I remember when the building at Hardin Burns in 37, the school board said, well, we can't build another building, but if you want to build one yourself, we'll supply the teachers and operate it. And so the community got out. I can remember that quite well. I was well, as a matter of fact, I was a freshman that year, 36, 37.
Uh-huh.
And the community just made up and built the building.
So they built this building, and they had to, of course, when they, in 1921, it started then as a two-year high school. It was just through the 8th grade through 1920. But in 1921, it became the 8th grades plus 2 years in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't recall the exact year, but it was in, I believe, let's see, 32, 4 years back, 1928. Then the school became a 4-year high school. And again, the citizens bought brick and built a new building out of their own pockets and with their own labor mostly to start the high school. And of course then when they built the dam, the TVA came along and tore down all the buildings and moved the town completely away.
And they never did replace that as a high school, did they?
No.
Now, I can remember, you and I are big basketball fans and always have been, I guess. There were 8 high school basketball games in this county.
I played on outdoor courts. Even played county tournaments in Marshall County on outdoor courts. I remember very distinctly going to Aurora one time, and they was having a county fair, and they had a county tournament on the outdoor courts at Aurora. And of course, at that time, all these big rivalry between all of the county high schools.
Oh, yes.
And I remember most all of those boys that played on all the teams in the high school, and I see them now. Many of them are passed on, but the ones I see, I still see them, enjoy meeting them and having.
You might have played against Damon Harrison over there.
I did.
Became a commerce commissioner up in Frankfurt.
Right, he's a fine ball player too. You had to beat him. He didn't give you anything.
Well, that's you know, people learned a lot. Maybe Miss McDonald ought to find out that basketball has some values too.
Oh yeah, I hate to see the position that she's taking on this. I can't hardly go along with this because I had sons that both played, and one of them was an honor student at Vanderbilt.
Jerry went to Vanderbilt, didn't he?
Right.
And he's now chairman of the hospital board?
right? And he's also a department head at Penwalk Corporation.
And a graduate of school of some note,
That's
Vanderbilt.
Right. And then I have a grandson that is just graduated this last spring from the University of Kentucky, who was third in the class of engineering, and he took chemical engineering, and that's not any snap either.
No.
And he was in the top 20 in the whole graduating class from the University of Kentucky. And he played basketball for Marshall County High School.
Well,
So
Robert,
you can do it if you tried. And Robert played at David Lipscomb, my oldest son.
very fine liberal arts school.
Right. And he's doing all right. He's head of a department now and at our products in Calvert City. So the education's there. Personally, my feelings is that the parents doesn't participate enough in education. I was president of the PTA about 3 years in a row because I couldn't get anybody else to take it.
And some people ignore that.
And they
yet
wouldn't
they're-
even go to school and help their kids register. We'd put on a big program every year to try to get the parents to go out. Well, naturally, the kids are going to take horseback riding and guitar picking or something or other rather than mathematics if they don't have the
somebody that-
assistance at home to
Sure.
cause them to take what they need.
Mhm.
And then when they get out of school, well, they don't have much education. Now, this is where the fault is, I think.
Yeah.
Now, the education can be had. I think we have a fine school system in Marshall County. It may be weak somewhere in the state, but I don't think it's too weak here. I don't say we couldn't improve. I think you always can.
Oh, yes. Of course, I went to Hardin, in some ways a rather poor school, but I remember Homer Holland told me that he went there and he was a successful man. He coached the 68, or rather the 38 Sharp state champion, and later became an official in McCracken County and worked for the health department and so on, taught at Lone Oak. And he said that even in those days, and he was talking about, I guess, 1917, 18, 22, along somewhere in there, that you could, if you wanted to, get a good education.
Oh, yeah.
And in some ways, they had fewer subjects. But when you got through with English and Latin and all that they crammed in you back then, you knew the basics pretty well.
Right. I think they do now. I think we have good teachers in our schools. I think we have good administrators.
We certainly have good plants, don't we?
And we certainly have the best plants in the state.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no reason why that if children get the proper support from home that they couldn't get a good education there.
Mm-hmm.
And this is my feeling. And
And I think we have 3 very fine junior highs, which I like.
Yeah, I do too. And I don't, there's a push on, I think, in a way, by the higher up in the state to do away with junior highs. But I don't agree with that. I'd like to keep them because I think this is it's the right
It's a fad.
position for education, just the way I see it. It's
One
more
of these-
effective.
One of these days, Christy, I'll say within 20 years, if we had in middle schools, they'll start a wave to go back to junior highs.
Well, I think they will.
Yeah. You know, those things come and go.
Yeah. And just like style and clothes.
Yeah. All right, when you got in high school at Gilbertsville, I guess you played basketball, as you said. Were there any other games much?
Well, we played baseball, and you mentioned Homer Holland one a while ago, and I remember one particular incident that always caused me to admire Homer Holland. He was coaching at Lone Oak.
Mm-hmm.
And we went down to play Lone Oak in baseball, and I guess we had a pretty good team, and they did too. And they had a real good left-handed pitcher, and boy, he could fire the ball. And I remember I'd forgotten my spikes, but it so happened I was a big old country boy, and I could wear the coach's shoes, but he didn't have any shoestrings in them. So they happened to be a red rag there, and so we just tore some strings out of that red rag, and I put them in my shoes. And so this pitcher is a little wild for Lone Oak, and he'd walk the bases full, and I came to bat, and they had 2 outs. And Homer come down the line, he said, "Strike old red shoestrings out." And of course, I kind of gritted my teeth when he did that, and I luckily got into one and hit it into the tennis court for a home run. I hit a grand slam home run, and we beat him. And as long as Homer lived, every time I'd see him, he'd say, "There's old red shoestrings." He never forgot it, and I never have either.
I wonder if he ever realized that he inspired you more than ever.
Well, I guess he did after he thought about it a while. But of course, he was going to kind of get my goat. See what he was trying to do. But it didn't. He kind of inspired me to hit it. I probably wouldn't have hit it if he hadn't said anything.
I suppose people have always done that. I can remember going to the little games. I don't know what kind of a league it was, but I'll tell you one thing, there were some good pitchers around, like Ty Goheen.
Yeah, I've caught Ty some, and I was a kid, and he was grown, but I caught him some.
Benton and Calvert and I know they played at Hardin, and I don't know how many teams there were in this league, but you saw some good people.
Oh, yeah.
Clay Darnell was a good ball player.
Oh, you bet. And all those Darnell boys were. Joe was too.
Yeah.
And I play golf with Clay now, and he's hard to beat playing golf. he's hard to beat. He's a good athlete.
Yeah. He really is.
There's one thing you might be interested in. I can remember a little bit about the steamboat days.
I'd like to hear that.
Now, of course, the railroad had been built, and actually the old wooden bridge at Old Gilbertsville had burned. But there was a big 2-story house where we lived that was right on the last bank before you go down into the river bottom. And from this house, we could see the boat landing. And my brother, Frank, who's been dead for many years, we'd spend a lot of time upstairs, and we could see everything that went on down at the boat landing. And they had chicken boats, and they had cattle boats, and these old paddle wheelers, and it was just the last days of the steamboats. Of course, packet boats. The packet boats would come up the river. Everybody'd order their groceries from Lax and Paducah by card. They'd write them a card and tell them they wanted a barrel of sugar, a barrel of coffee, and
those boats delivered mail too.
Yeah, and mail, and they'd come up the river and they'd blow the landings. That's why all up and down the Tennessee River they had different landings, and every landing had a different blow, like so many shorts and so many longs. And when the farmers is in the field all up and down the river, they'd blow those blows,
and they knew which one it was.
They knew the boat was coming up the river and was putting groceries out at that landing. And if they'd ordered groceries, well, they'd take out from the plow and hook up to the wagon and go to the river and get their groceries. And they just set them out on the bank. They had hostlers that would set them out on the bank, just leave them there. Now, this is the kind of trust and honesty there was in those days. You never heard about anybody ever getting anybody else's groceries or anything like that. And this is all up and down the river. And, of course, then right on the wind-up of that, Gilbertsville then had a stockyards because they had a railroad there. And they didn't have trucks to haul the stock in, and they'd even drive big herds of hogs in there to the stockyards to load them on railroad cars. I don't remember all this. Now this was just right on the, just as the steamboat era was ending, the railroad era was coming in. And I can remember this. Of course, I was small and don't remember this as much as people who participated, but I can remember.
You know, that reminds me of, there's an interesting article in this month's Filson Club History Journal out of Louisville that tells about specifically the packet boats that ran and carried mail and groceries and some passengers from, I believe this particular article was Canton down to Linton or somewhere on the Cumberland, not very far from us. And it sounds almost exactly like what you've told about how they met that and how they'd whistle to stop and so forth.
I imagine they did the same thing on the Cumberland River. I know they did on the Tennessee, and I guess they did on the Ohio River, too.
Well, now, before we get clear away, I want to find out how you met this beautiful lady from, I think one time I was talking to her, and she told me she was from Bealerton.
Yeah, she went to school at Bealerton, and she also went to high school at Clinton. She went to both schools. They moved sometime during her high school days.
Now, what was her maiden name?
Latta. And I met her at Murray State, and she had already taught a couple of schools when I met her, but she hadn't finished her college degree, and she'd come up in the spring and summer after her school was out and go to school again, and this is where I met her. We fell in love, and that ended my school days. I had to go to work then to make a living.
But you did go to Murray State, so you're an alumnus of Murray.
I went a year more, just a little more than a year and a semester.
Now, what she was doing was also very, very common, because people had at one time taught on 8th grade diplomas, and then high school, and then with a 2-year
emergency certificate, they called it. And this is what she was teaching on.
Yeah.
And we had 2 sons, Robert and Jerry. We have 7 grandchildren now. 3 of them are in college now. One graduated in the spring. Jerry has 2 in University of Kentucky, a boy and a girl. And Robert has a boy in University of Kentucky and one at David Lipscomb, a girl. And she is a senior down there this time. And Jerry's oldest boy is a junior this time, and his girl's a sophomore. And Robert's youngest boy is a freshman at UK. So they're all going to school, and they'll all do all right. I mean, they may not make as high grades as the older one did, all of them, but they'll make good grades. And because they had a good background in Marshall County.
Well, that's great. I hope Reed Conder hears that, and of the board members and
I
others
appreciate
who-
Reed Conder. Of course, I've known his wife's family all my life.
Well, she's from around Calvert.
She's from Old Gilbertsville.
Old
So
Gilbert.
she was.
Yeah.
She's a descendant from the Owens and the Wades, and both the Owens and the Wades was from Old Gilbertsville. Now, Reed's wife's grandpa was worked for the railroad company, and he run the pumping station on Tennessee River when the steam engines used to pull the trains through there.
They used a lot of water, didn't
And every one of them would stop going both ways and take water, see, there at the station. And he run the pumpers that pumped this water out of the river up to the tanks. And so I've known the Owens and the Wades all these years. Some of the old pioneer families from that end of Marshall County were the Owens, the Wades, the Joneses, the Duvalls, the Hamiltons, the Skillians, the Marshalls, the Joneses. Well, I know I'll miss some of the real old timers.
Well, of course
But,
you do when you're ad-libbing, and
yeah.
I hope no one's offended by that. If they are, I've offended thousands of people, I'm sure, at times. But now you started working real young with helping your dad. That was something you could do
8 years old.
because you were familiar with
I
horses.
even made a crop when I was 8 years old by myself.
You have farmed then.
Oh yeah, we had to move to the farm because my dad had to keep up those horses. Now, 2 horses on a mail route couldn't go for a whole winter, and he had to have extra horses, and that took a lot of feed.
The roads were muddy and rutted, and it pulled them hard.
Well, see, all the farmers hauled all of their tobacco, their grain, and everything they sold went over those roads, and they weren't all gravel roads at that time. And they'd cut those roads to the hubs on their wagons with 4 and 6 horse teams, and so he'd have to drive 2 horse teams to even get a buggy over them. And that 30 miles every day would soon get a horse.
And I don't suppose that, with a size family and keeping up a horse and buggy required some money, and with the salaries then, it wasn't any enormous
Oh no, it wasn't.
amount.
It was a good salary at that time, but I mean, there was 10 of us, see, in my family. My dad had 10 children, and I was the oldest.
So you grew a lot of your food and all that the horses ate.
Right.
Well, that
We had our own cattle, our cows for our milk. We raised our own hogs for meat. And this is what most of the farmers did at that time, and then this is what we did. So under the guidance of my dad, I started farming at 8 years old.
well, we've still got about 3 more minutes or so, but then what did you do next?
When I finished high school and got out of the first job I ever had when I got out of high school, I started to work at a sawmill, off bearing at a sawmill.
That's hard work.
Oh yeah, it's hard work, and but still, I mean, I was used to hard work. I had set tobacco and cut tobacco, and all that kind of work is hard work. Put up hay.
Setting tobacco is about as hard as I ever did.
And I was off bearing at a sawmill where they wasn't cutting anything but barn patterns, and one man would do the off bearing. You'd think, well, you can't do that with a 20-foot sill here or a post that's 25 feet high, but you can if you know how. And they'd show you how.
Oh boy, yeah.
And so I didn't stay on that too long, but then I started to school at Murray, and after I got out of school at Murray, I married, and believe it or not, I married on Saturday and went to work for the TVA on Monday.
And you worked for them until when did the Calvert industry start that you went into?
Well, now it started in the 40s. Let's see, 49.
Penwalt, I guess, was the first
First
one.
one.
Salt then.
Yeah.
And did you go to work for them?
I went to work for them, and I was there. But I had boomed around over the country at construction. Now, while I was working for the TVA, I also went to school. I got the equivalent to a mechanical engineer's degree with them. I went to school at night and got 500 hours in school with 7,500 hours on the job.
You did it the hard way.
That's right.
But-
And I didn't get paid for that time I went to school either. I did that on my own.
It did help you advance.
But it helped me advance, and I could get ever so after I passed the examination in every period, I'd get a raise in pay. And this is what I was doing it for. This is the only way I could do it and raise a family, and that's what I did. And I'm proud I did. I don't begrudge anybody that gets it the other way, but I'm glad I did it that way because I know how it came.
Yes. Well, that's fine. That's interesting. Do you have any Anything else, any particular incident that you might tell us about that would be amusing, or
Well,
of course it doesn't have to be funny.
no, really, I don't know. Don't really. I could guess I could recall something about the best. My last basketball game that I played in high school. We played Old Birmingham. The year that they lost in the quarterfinals at Louisville to Mayo in 3 overtime periods by 1 point, and we beat them.
Mm-hmm.
Now
Robert Goheen and Red Terry.
Red Terry and Virgil Provine, Wilfred Baker, and Cecil Dunnigan was their team.
Mm-hmm.
And we played them the last regular game of the season. And after that game was over, I took double pneumonia and missed all the tournaments.
Oh.
Now,
it might have been.
At that time, game of the season. And after that game was over, I took double pneumonia and missed all the tournaments.
Oh.
Now,
it might have been.
At that time, myself and a Gromar boy that played for Mayo
Mm-hmm.
was the 2 biggest boys playing basketball in the state of Kentucky.